There's one game left for the Cincinnati Bengals in 2023, but many of you have turned your attention to off-season questions. Let's get into the first mailbag of 2024.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow, along with your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and if you're new, you can subscribe on YouTube, follow anywhere you get your podcasts, and if you don't want to watch us, you can listen on one of those audio-only apps, but if you want to see our faces as we deliver to you the best of Bengals news and analysis out there, you can find us on YouTube as well. Join the group of everydayers, a group that makes us their first listen. We appreciate every single one of you who support us. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. You'll save $20 on your first purchase of tickets in the Gametime app with promo code Locked On. And James, we've got a mailbag for the people today.
Yeah, we do. I'm excited about this. I know we've gotten a lot of, hey, when you have that next mailbag, and we haven't done a mailbag in a while. So let's dive into an off-season mailbag that's full of really good questions about the off-season. And what I think is interesting is the biggest issues and a lot of people asking these questions. So if we didn't name you, know that we saw them and that we just picked one. But let's start with @TaylorStep. How do you address all of the massive holes on the team? And he names interior defensive line, wide receiver, offensive line, cornerback, tight end, edge, running back with the resources available. And he mentions the Burrow deal and all of those things. But just to limit the question and keep it confined to that, how do you think the Bengals will address their biggest weaknesses?
It's a great example of a question that multiple people asked in different ways too.
Yeah.
Shouting out one other one that I just saw as I was looking through the many responses. One of our most responded to mailbag tweets in a long time. Bengals watch party. Yeah, Bengals party was like, prioritize the following needs: right tackle, 3-tech, nose tackle, tight end, running back, corner, defensive end, wide receiver. So clearly a thought that is on the minds of many is that this is going to be a tumultuous offseason with the number of Cincinnati Bengals free agents and the number of spots that they need to improve, something we alluded to a little bit in a show in yesterday's show. DJ Reader, Tyler Boyd, Chidobe Awuzie, Jonah Williams, Tee Higgins, free agents. Backup defensive tackle Josh Tupou, free agent. Tight end depth, Tanner Hudson, Mitchell Wilcox, free agents. So quite a lot for the Bengals to deal with, and they will have to address this via free agency, either retaining some players or signing some external guys. Will need to do it in the draft as well. And for this list, I don't see how they get through this offseason without spending money on the interior defensive line. I think it's a spot they know they need to be better, and they have free agents. And when you lose your best player at a position, yeah, maybe you want to go address that in the draft, but they need to stabilize the spot. They need to stabilize depth. And the need is more than just one guy. And that's why I think that position in particular is one where they'll need to spend money. Wide receiver also wouldn't surprise me if they add or retain Tee Higgins or add a veteran. You just don't want to probably go from the group they have now to Jamar Chase and some dudes. That one I think makes sense to spend some money as well. Mm-hmm. And then for the rest of these, it's pretty interesting. You could see it going either way, I think, where they've just spent a first-round pick on an edge player. They've extended Trey Hendrickson. Sam Hubbard's still under contract. Hard to imagine them spending much more money at edge, but they value the position in the draft if it's available. Running back, hard to imagine, again, them spending more money there, in my opinion. And if anything, we might see them spend less money, but adding another running back in the draft if it's available, you could certainly see that. Same for tight end. Corner, I think you're probably pretty set for the starters. You could see a veteran, but I don't think it's a big expenditure. And Offensive line is probably the big question, right? Do they try to go first round right tackle, or do they try to replace Jonah Williams with himself or a veteran?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dilemma. Can you pay him? Do you want to pay him more so? They can, to be clear. T, do you franchise tag him to have him on the team, or do you franchise tag him to move him, or do you let him walk? I think letting him walk is the least likely of the three. But there's a lot of dilemmas. And I agree with you. Interior defensive line, you go back to our post-game show, and I was like, yeah, they got their tails kicked right there. And they have to be better in that area. And whether that's investing in DJ Reader on a shorter-term contract, and I still don't know if that's going to happen, where he is still available and is able to take a more of a team-friendly deal, because I think we all assumed he was going to sign elsewhere before his injury, or if they go out and they get other pieces. But right now it's BJ Hill and a bunch of guys, just a bunch of dudes. And
it's not even a bunch. It's like BJ Hill and Zach Carter, and that's it.
Sure. Yeah. All right. That's fair. That's fair. But like Cam Sample rotates in and guys like that. But that's not
technically Jay Tufele too.
Jay Tufele, just the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where they need to improve. And who knows? You're seeing mock drafts, and a lot of people are focused on defensive linemen, offensive linemen. And that's why trying to keep Jonah is an interesting debate, because I could understand wanting to get cheaper in the offensive line room because you're literally spending on everyone not named Cordell Volson. I also look at it and see Ted Karras has 1 year left. Scappa has 2 years left. Maybe you could spend on Jonah and it's not as dire because he is 25 years old, 26, like he's entering his prime, it feels like, and playing as well as we've seen him. So there are a lot of weaknesses or potential weaknesses. I don't think any are as big as the defensive line in the interior of the defensive line. I think edge, it's interesting. Is Joseph Osai just going to be in the doghouse forever?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big question. And I do wonder. I wonder, with Sam Hubbard nicked up and admitting that, why play Sam Hubbard this week? Why not get Miles Murphy and Joseph Osai some snaps? That's a side conversation. But I think cornerback has been weird. Like, a lot of people are talking about corner, and I could totally see the Bengals looking at corner if it's the best player available. Always, like, they just love cornerbacks. I also think there are multiple spots, multiple positions that they would ideally take ahead of corner in their minds, but they're not going to reach, of course. And we have plenty of time to discuss that. But how do they address them? Just short answer or long answer to a short question. Interior defensive line, I think it's a hybrid. Free agency in the draft. Wide receiver, totally dependent on T. I don't think you can lose T and Tyler and not bring in a veteran, because we haven't seen enough out of Charlie Jones. We haven't seen enough out of Andre Yosavash, and you can't sell me. And I like Trenton Irwin potentially being wide receiver 2 at times next year. Offensive line, it's really Jonah dependent. I think that's it. Obviously, they'll be open to it in the draft. And then from there, who knows? But those are the 3 big ones. Running back is interesting. I don't think Joe Mixon will be back at that money. I just don't. Maybe I'm dead wrong on that. I think that they'll look elsewhere. I think Chase Brown will be the one guy that remains next year in this running back room. Could be dead wrong on that. Just a gut feeling.
Just want to quickly add that it is actually BJ Hill and a bunch of guys. Devonta Maxwell and Travis Bell also at the end of the roster, under contract for 2024 and playing.
Look at Jake.
Interior.
It is a bunch of guys.
Spots. It is a bunch
of
guys.
Bushel.
A bushel? Wow. The one other comment that I'm just going to float out there and probably upset a bunch of people on this topic is, you mentioned the money for Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's cap hit next year, $8.5 million. They've simply not gotten the production out of the running game. And we'll be talking about that position and that issue probably quite a bit this offseason. Some of it could be to do with the offensive line too, and finding athletic improvements there, finding scheme improvements in the run game, whatever it is. The other one that I'm looking at for is the juice worth the squeeze from a money perspective that I don't think the Bengals are considering at all, is I would at least be sitting down and having the hard conversation and evaluation of Sam Hubbard's contract with the amount of money you're spending on the defensive line and he's been playing through injury this year, so maybe that's it. But he's been playing against a bunch of embattled right tackles this year, and the production just has not been what it has been in recent years for Hubbard. He's not getting paid a ton, but like I said, if it's me, and I don't think the Bengals will do this, I'd be having that hard evaluation and really thinking about that one. Coming up next, we stay on the topic of off-season decision-making as the Bengals face a difficult one. We'll get back into it.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry about when you're buying tickets to the next big event you want to go to, whether it's concerts, whether it's sports, music, comedy, theater. Well, they have you covered at Gametime with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And the best part about Gametime, and I've had multiple people use Gametime, multiple listeners use Gametime for Bengals games this year. You can get last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. So maybe you want to see the Bengals season finale this week. That's fine. Get into the Gametime app. And right now, well, you're going to save, because if you download the Gametime app, you create an account and use code LOCKED ON, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, all you have to do is create an account and redeem code LOCKED ON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
James, time to put on your GM cap and perhaps an opportunity to discuss my aforementioned idea about Sam Hubbard, who, again, I think this is not something that the Bengals are considering. But Andrew Russell at Andrew_Russell7 asks, you're the GM of the Bengals. What are the first 3 to 5 realistic moves that you make this offseason?
First one would be trying to re-sign Tee Higgins. That would be the first one. That would be number one on my priority list. And I would offer him a similar deal to what A.J. Brown received from the Eagles. So 4 years, $100 million. And I think he would take it. I do. I think he would take it. That's what I would do as GM. I don't think the Bengals are going to do that. So let's not get too excited. I don't think they're going to do that because they have another guy in Jamar Chase who can be extended this offseason. And those would be my first 2 moves. I would find a way to get T done. And then I would figure out what Jamar's looking for. And if I could get that done before Justin Jefferson. Now, if T wants $30 million per, well, it's just not happening. But I think he would take the A.J. Brown deal. So I would offer him the A.J. Brown deal, 4 years, $100 million. I forget the guarantees. I would still do it. And then I would look at Jamar and see if you can get that done before Justin Jefferson. Because if you can keep those 2, you have your core now. You have your guys on offense that you know you can build around that. And that's the Bengals ecosystem. That's what this offense is built on, is Joe Burrow and weapons. And so you don't have to worry about wide receiver in the draft. It doesn't mean you don't take one, because those are just 2 receivers, right? It leaves the door open, but it's not necessarily one of those giant needs. And that doesn't mean that Tee Higgins is going to be here for the rest of his career. It doesn't mean that you have to keep both guys forever. But I think it's more valuable to sign him, keep him now. And then if it doesn't work, you want to reconstruct things down the line, you make that call then. But that's what I would do. And then 3, it's either Jonah Williams and keeping him, or defensive line. And I would weigh the defensive line market probably at the combine and figure out how realistic it is. Because that's what happens. Like Orlando Brown Jr., for example, he found out he wasn't getting tagged last year. He thought he was just going to get tagged by the Chiefs. Found out at the combine, little birdies, chirp, chirp, chirp. And you hear, oh, the Chiefs aren't going to tag Orlando Brown Jr. and he's going to become a free agent. What options will you have in that defensive line world, in that defensive line market? Because odds are it's either interior defensive line or pay Jonah Williams. And I think you can address one in the draft significantly. But if you don't pay Jonah, then you better be banking on getting a right tackle early. And same thing with defensive tackle. You may be able to get a mid-tier or lower tier contributor in free agency, but you're going to need to bank on one early if you don't add one of these higher end plug and play type starters at defensive tackle. So that would be kind of my priority list. Shocker, it starts with weapons, but I think getting T done, it makes sense to me, and we'll see if they can.
I think that you need to set yourself up for the draft, obviously. And you make a great point about sussing out the market at the combine. That's when you'll get a pretty good idea of some of these higher end free agents and the decisions for them. But you go look at PFF Brad Spielberger's work over at PFF does a great job projecting contracts every year. And those will be refined because he also hears things through the combine and he has his own birdies that adjust his expectations. But he's been so incredible at projecting contracts for free agents around the NFL within percentage points quite often, sometimes nailing exact numbers and durations, and maybe he's a little bit off on guarantees. But Tee Higgins is definitely where it starts. And it's more complicated than it ought to be because they've also got Jamar Chase coming up for a deal and they just paid Joe Burrow. And so we're still thinking about the same question as we were thinking about last year, which is, do they pay T, Jamar, and Joe? And last year indications were in the offseason before 2023's season started and got underway that Tee Higgins and the Bengals weren't close. And so how does this year impact all of that? How does this year impact the Bengals approach? How does it impact T's market? How does it impact potential trade returns if the Bengals were interested in exploring trade returns for Tee Higgins after Duke Tobin last year at the combine famously said, get your own? But I do think that I agree with you. That's where it starts. Then you have to figure out what you're doing with the rest of your money. I think that over the course of the season, I probably wouldn't be super comfortable giving Jonah Williams a multi-year starting tackle contract, depending on what it is. Like if it's 20 million plus, the way that Mike McGlinchey got paid and Jawan Taylor got paid and all these guys that were kind of average tackles got paid, I wouldn't be interested, but I don't think you can go into the draft with nothing at tackle. And if they don't have Jonah Williams, they effectively have nothing. So you look at the free agent market, there are some other tackles out there, but I would make sure that you have somebody that you're comfortable with. We're going to be talking about Jermaine Illuminor again this year, who has had a solid year for the Raiders. We're going to be talking about guys like Mike Nwenu from the New England Patriots with a ton of versatility, but maybe not the athleticism you're looking for. And maybe he honestly would get paid too much to go into the draft being open to drafting a tackle as well. But the nice thing about Nwenu in particular is he gives you guard flexibility if you still want to draft a tackle. So, we're going to be talking about Mike Nwenu on this podcast, spoiler alert. But if you're looking for another place where I would be interested in spending money, it might be one of Justin Madubuike or Christian Wilkins. I don't know if those are realistic, but
Madubuike is a freak. Yeah. Do it, Jake. Do it, GM Jake. Pull the trigger.
That's something that I'm exploring, right? You have a massive contract and DJ Reader coming off the books. These guys would probably cost more, and Christian Wilkins is projected to be franchise tagged by the Miami Dolphins, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. But Madubuike would be a pretty valid improvement if you don't have DJ Reader, not over DJ Reader, but over what you have, and would give you a solid starter on a second contract, much like DJ Reader is on a second contract, one of the younger free agents at the position as well. So you have to figure out where you're spending the money, whether it's Tee Higgins, whether it's another big free agent, whether they go for a bunch of mid-level free agents like the Mike Nwenu's and the, I don't know, what's Chase Young going to get paid? Do you do it? I don't know. Nope. I'm just picking names out of the mid tier, right?
Yeah, I'm out on Chase. I'm good.
Dalton Schultz.
I was in last year. What's he going to get paid now?
He's projected at 3 years, 11 a year.
Probably not for Schultz. Hunter Henry will get half that, and he's older, but they're not going to go long-term with tight end anyway. Like, excuse me, what I think they'll do with tight end, and I guess this is what we'll do, and I don't know exactly what I would do at tight end yet, but I would do enough to where you feel confident in what you have, but not so much that if Brock Bowers is staring at you at 15 and clearly the best player on your board, that you're not willing to take him. And I'm just giving you a scenario, right? Like last year, they were clearly in on Dalton Kincaid if they could have taken him. And so add to the position to where it's not break glass, let's draft Billy Price because we didn't get Frack Ragnow in round one, emergency. But yeah.
Noah Fant, Grover Stewart. Like I'm just trying to name mid-range free agents where they could go get a few of those guys, and they probably need to take that approach after they sign one higher end free agent, which is most likely to be Tee Higgins, even if it is the franchise tag, just because that's a lot of money. But we have more to
I
talk about in this mailbag. It's too early
have a
to
question about
get
T for
real
you.
deep into
I
this.
have
Okay.
a question about T for you. So
Great.
let's do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's number one sports book, and the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel. Right now, new customers, which can be you, they get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. $150 for a $5 bet, win or lose. It doesn't matter about the outcome. All you have to do is go to FanDuel today. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And that means you can wager with same game parlays. You can get in on the action. Michigan, Washington. Oh, I know a few players in that matchup that Bengals fans are eyeing. Maybe some skill guys, Jake. Oh, yeah. We will talk about skill guys this offseason. But maybe you think you know who's going to win the national championship, or you want to get in on some different prop bets. Or maybe you think Jake Browning is going to throw for 7,000 yards on Sunday in the Battle of Ohio. You can wager on that as well with FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup when you place a $5 bet and get $150 in bonus bets. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
What about Lloyd Cushenberry? Get Joe's center back and reunite. Anyway, you said you had a question for me, and I'll stop just naming dudes who play in the NFL and are free agents.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Oh,
Yep.
Are we just naming for Justin Jefferson? Oh,
Yep.
Whoa. See, when I get asked about, what would GM James do? We're not really ready to have that conversation yet. So let's just hold off.
Well, he did say realistic in the question.
Hey, never mind. That would sound too cocky. Anyways, I'm not going to say it. My question about T, are you tagging him and keeping him for 22 million-ish roughly? Or would you tag him to trade him?
I would tag him to try to extend him. Right? That's the first.
Sure. Yeah. Sign him. Correct. I agree with that.
Are you playing him on the franchise tag?
Would you go into a stare down with Tee Higgins if he's like, no, I'm not doing that?
I think the Bengals would.
Okay.
Would I? I would. I think that we're just so affected. I won't speak for you. I'm so affected by what happened with Jesse Bates and the way they tagged him. Couldn't get anything done. Didn't get anything for him. And now he's playing like the all-pro level player that he's always thought he was. And to be fair, the Bengals didn't get this level of Jesse Bates for the last couple of years of his contract consistently. But after having that experience, it makes you not want to go through it again with another homegrown second-round pick who has played at a very high level for the team. But you know what's different about it is the injury history. And that's something that you really have to think about and makes things much more challenging with T and with DJ Reader than necessarily they were with Jesse Bates.
Yeah, and shout out to Tony Crampo. He asked about franchise tagging T, so this kind of aligns a bit. I kind of molded it into my own to a degree, but it was something that people were asking about. I would, in order of what I would do with T, I would sign him. Then I would tag him with hopes of signing him. And then I would trade him. I would tag and trade him. And that's the only way they can trade him, to be clear. I would call the Carolina Panthers. They have the 33rd overall pick. I know a lot of people have ones in their head. It will be harder to do now because there's no years of control. It's just a franchise tag. Obviously, you're extending him. I would call the Carolina Panthers, who I think will be desperate. And I say, we want the 33rd pick for Tee Higgins. And I think the Panthers would do it because they don't have a pick in the first round. It's not like they can take Marvin Harrison Jr., the Bryce Young trade, and then you get a big target for Bryce Young. And so that's one team that stands out to me. Atlanta is interesting too, oddly enough. I think the Mulligeta ties, those matter. I think that they could certainly use a guy like Tee Higgins on that offense. You never know. But no, I would trade him.
Green Bay, who
Just that-
wanted him last year.
Sure. Their receivers are pretty good. Like
They've been solid for sure, but they don't have a guy like T.
no doubt. And maybe that's what they do is they're like, hey, let's go in and get the guy that we picked Jordan Love over. We get that guy so Jordan Love can become a star in this league. Maybe they view it that way. So I do think he will have suitors. There's no doubt. And to your point, I don't think you can get nothing. And I also don't think you can have a free agent offseason at any point in this window where you're not doing what you did with Orlando Brown Jr., where you find these veterans that want to come. Like, I think that's going to continue, but it's going to cost. And it's going to cost you that compensatory selection that you would get for T anyways. So to me, having him play it out, and I love T, is not an option. Tag and play it out. It would be everything else, starting with re-signing and trying to keep him and going from there.
It's just getting nothing for assets when you can't keep them. Like they historically, one of the things they prided themselves on was keeping their good homegrown players. And there were always instances where they didn't do it at positions they didn't value as highly, and safety is one of them. But we saw it with guard consistently with Kevin Zeitler. I mean, they all go to Cleveland for some reason, but Zeitler and Steinbach. And we saw it with Jesse Bates. I mean, some examples in recent history, at least on second contracts. But wide receiver position, we know they value very highly. It's just muddy because they have two of them. And they're probably thinking about how much they want to actually spend on the position. Some interesting questions. And we're going to have time to expand on them and continue to talk about them. The last one for today, James. Hate it here, love sports at my 33263705. We read the full Twitter names when they're appropriate. Would like to know what our thoughts are on acquiring a free safety, either a veteran or in the draft, to let Dax dominate in the box and closer to the line of scrimmage.
This is so weird. The past 3 days, social media has been all about Dax Hill. But I mean, I guess 2 days. But Dax Hill potentially moving or not being a safety or being a slot corner or whatever. I'll say a couple of things. First off, I think the future slot corner on the team outside of Mike Hilton, I think it might be DJ Turner. There's the first one. 2, Dax Hill, it's his first year playing free safety, and he's been much better than people realize. I know he's made some mistakes, like the George Pickens. It's an awful play. Awful. He'll tell you that. Dropped interceptions, but he's a good tackler. He has made plays. They use him in a bunch of different ways. They trust him to move in the box and do all of those things and guard in the slot. But he's also easily their best option at free safety. He's still learning it. And what I think happened this year is the Nick Scott experiment failed way worse than they could have imagined. And so it made it a little harder. But I would be absolutely stunned, floored, whatever adjective you want to use to describe it, if Dax Hill and Jordan Battle aren't your starting safeties in September at the start of the 2024 season. Absolutely stunned. I think that's rock solid. Maybe they add a body in that room. They could move on from Nick Scott, but I don't think either guy is threatened. I think they're banking on those two guys. They're banking on Cam Taylor-Britt. They're banking on DJ Turner, this young secondary, to develop together and grow together.
Wouldn't surprise me at all if they add to that room, but I do think those are the starters because and maybe this is just me looking at some of the other teams around the AFC, specifically the Ravens, and looking at how they built their team. But the Ravens went deep at safety. They have versatile guys, and you have a versatile guy in Dax Hill, like Kyle Hamilton, versatile player in the Ravens secondary, and having a guy like Geno Stone emerge as a backup safety gives them flexibility in their secondary. And I am wondering about DJ Turner's future as a slot corner, just given it would be a very different style of slot corner than Mike Hilton. They would have to adjust for that in a big way. And Lou Anarumo seems to mostly really value physicality and the ability to play the run in his corners, which is not something DJ Turner has excelled with this year. So I do think that the secondary could see some changes, but they're probably more long term than anything immediate. Like I think the starters for next year are probably set, barring
Unless
overwhelming value.
Yeah, unless the right guy falls in round 1.
Right.
Or there's an injury. I mean,
Yeah.
that's probably it. Because even if you spend a second round pick on corner, I doubt that he comes in and starts right away.
But they do need depth, especially
Sure.
DJ Ivy coming off an ACL. Don't know
Yep.
what his future is going to be. Cheeto's free agent. Don't know what his future is going to be. So they will need to add some depth, I think, for both positions. Tyson Anderson, another injury. And there's nobody else at safety if Nick Scott isn't back. So a need for depth throughout the secondary and honestly throughout the defense with backup linebackers being free agents and a need for defensive line depth. I mean, you can talk about every position on that defense and talk about a need for depth. And those are things that we're going to be able to talk about this offseason. But one more game of the 2023 regular season. We've got a crossover and a game preview coming up for you to finish out this season. And until then, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.